Welcome back to Fire Emblem Path of Radiance. Last time, we started the game and had Ike beat his father in his first test of becoming a mercenary. This time, Ike is going to go out on his first real job. And I can't help but think of the PBR announcer when I see this. And now, the battle begins! Also, if you look closely here, you might see an early bird cameo of some of the map models of the Grail mercenaries before they're formally introduced. If you already know this game's characters, you can probably pick out who some of them are there. And yes, it's Titania, she is amazing. I like how the text sort of stopped there as a way of emphasizing how Grail is speaking. What you are is late. Kind of like that. Now it's like, quiet, the adults are talking. So, what is our first job? Well, this is a Fire Emblem game, so 3 guesses as to what it is, and the first 2 don't count. Yep, it's Bandits. Of course it's Bandits. Why wouldn't it be Bandits? Well, I mean, I know there are some Fire Emblem games that don't start with Bandits, but this is not one of them. In fact, we're going to be fighting Bandits for not really that long of a time, but still most of the early game. Well, most of the extreme early game. So we now know that Boyd has a brother. And we know about 2 other members of this group called Shinnon and Gatry. They seem to be more senior members. So here's our starting party of 4. You can see Miss there in the map talking to someone else, but meet Oscar. This is Boyd's older brother. You might recognize him from Fire Emblem Heroes. You might also be wondering, we've got a Green Knight, but where's the Red Knight? Yeah. Actually, I shouldn't be snarking him too much. Boyd is actually pretty amazing, as we'll see in the chapter itself. It's actually kind of funny. What Ike's describing now, that's actually exactly how I felt the night before I recorded this. And so, Ike's first mission begins. Here's our quick little pan of the area. We've got a lot of axe users. Pretty typical of an early game Fire Emblem chapter where the main character uses swords. This is also a great theme. The village of Chaldea. And we're fighting bandits, of course. So this is a Seas mission. There aren't that many Seas missions in this game, in my opinion. And I think this is the... like, after this one, there's not that many Seas missions for a while. Yeah, obviously, even though they're mostly axe users, I can't take that many hits at this point in the game. And you also should rely on Titania, because she's amazing, as I will explain soon. And Oscar's leaning pretty hard on the 4th wall there. What, you're not going to thank Titania? We'll see. And so it begins. Before I do anything else, I'm going to show the mounted units tutorial. Because mounted units work a bit differently than how they do in other games, and in fact they have a certain feature that makes them very, very powerful here. This applies to all types of mounted units, horses, pegasi, and wyverns. It's also really weird to see a wyvern rider in a blue palette, by the way. Yeah, well, not fully. Let's show how this works. Now, if you play the GBA games, you'll know that mounted units could use up their leftover movement after they performed any action that wasn't an attack action. In this game, same thing, except they can also do it after an attack action. Yeah, mounted units can hit and run in Path of Radiance and Radiant Dawn. This is usually referred to by fans as Canto, after what it's called in Radiant Dawn, but Canto refers to something different in this game, and in fact I'd argue Canto is actually a mistranslation. I'll talk about that a lot later. Yes, second move is actually what it's really called. But they can't attack during this second move. And they also can't do things like trade or the like, but it's still extremely powerful. And this applies to Pegasi and Wyvern Riders too. If you start your movement right next to an enemy, you can hit them and then still move your full distance. It's very, very powerful. Mounted units can't shove, but that's a very small price to pay. And we just happen to have two mounted units of our own, Titania and Oscar. I'm going to cover Titania first.
Some think daily training is boring. I think it keeps you alive. So, let's keep it up, alright?
Remember Seth from Sacred Stones? Well, meet Seth 2.0. Titania is a crunch character who starts out massively more powerful than everyone else in your party, and can pretty much solo most of the early game. However, she has very, very good growth rates as well, so she still keeps up being strong all the way until the end of the game. I personally don't consider her to be as brokenly overpowered as Seth, but that's only because of the way that Path of Radiance is designed. This is a game where it's quite easy to make multiple characters very powerful, so I find that even speedruns of this game tend to be team efforts rather than solos. That said though, Titania is still really, really good, and being a paladin in this game where paladins are absolutely broken makes her even better. What also makes her even better is that she's an axe-focused paladin. For those who don't know, axes are extremely powerful in Ike's games. They're some of the strongest they've ever been in the series, so being an axe specialist is a very desirable trait to have in this game. And she can always break out lances for those pesky sword users. There's not much more to say about her stat-wise. She will fall behind in stats a little bit at the very end of the game, but enemies in Path of Radiance, even on the highest difficulty, at least in the English version, are very, very weak, so you don't need stats that high to do well in the endgame. If Titania has any weaknesses, I guess her affinity isn't that great, and there's also her starting skill. She's the first character we're encountering who starts with a skill, and in her case, it's Counter. Now, I know what you're all thinking. If you've played Awakening, forget everything you know about this skill. Counter is actually really bad in this game. It's one of the worst skills in the game, in my opinion. It only has a skill over 2% chance of activating, and it only counters half the damage you took if it does activate. And given that Titania barely takes much damage anyway for most of the game, it's really not a useful skill. In fact, I'd recommend removing it as soon as you have access to skill removal. But other than that though, Titania is amazing, and even though she only gains 1 experience from most fights at this point, don't be afraid to use her a lot early on. Due to a certain mechanic in this game called bonus experience that I'll be covering in more detail later, it's technically better for the rest of your army, not worse, to just speedrun the early game with Titania. It will result in more experience for them in the long run. But I personally don't find this way of playing to be that fun, so I'm not going to be doing that. But still, expect to see me using Titania a lot. And now, here's Oscar.
When we're in danger, you must, rely on me.
Oscar is another mounted character, and he's also amazing. You might notice that his growths are a lot lower than Titania's, but Oscar has a lot more room to grow than she does, so he'll still end up great, even better than her by the end of the game. He may struggle a tiny bit in the very early chapters due to the abundance of axe bandits, but past chapter 4, this game is basically lancers all the time, so it doesn't really matter that much. He's basically another strong mounted unit who has solid stats all round, kind of specializing in skill and speed, but really he has a good balance of strength, skill, speed, and defense. Another great thing about Oscar, he has Earth Affinity, and I mentioned how good that was back in Ike's bio. And remember how I said Ike has access to a support partner with that affinity? That's Oscar. Not only that, Ike and Oscar support very, very quickly. So that's a support that I'd highly recommend if you're more concerned with supports from a gameplay standpoint. Unlike Ike though, Oscar has another support partner with Earth Affinity, which means he can potentially have an A Earth and a B Earth, giving him plus 50 to evasion, which is frankly ridiculous. And it's not just normal supports, Oscar also benefits a lot from bond supports, especially early on. I'll be showing this in action later in the chapter. For now, I'll just say that Boyd is a very good person to be sharing a 10% critical bonus with. Oscar has no starting skills, but if anything it just means that his skill capacity is freed up for really good things like Soul and Savior later in the game. Speaking of later in the game, I now need to talk about how promoting Paladins works in Path of Radiance because it's actually pretty unique. In this game, instead of Cavaliers, you have a different Knight class for each weapon type. Oscar here is a Lance Knight, so he's restricted to Lances until promotion. When one of these Knights promotes to Paladin, you get to choose a secondary weapon type out of whichever weapons they don't already have. So Oscar has the choice between swords, axes, and bows. Here's something really annoying though. If you're a perfectionist when it comes to base conversations in this game, you absolutely have to choose bows for Oscar on promotion. It isn't really the best option for him, but it's required to unlock a base conversation in chapter 19. Obviously, it also means Oscar needs to be promoted before that chapter. Don't worry if you're not concerned about story, this conversation doesn't have any particularly major gameplay benefits, but if you are concerned with story, you're forced to pick bows for Oscar, so that's kind of a shame. In summary though, Oscar is very solid and a great option to use all throughout the game. And lastly we have Boyd. He's not mounted, but he is still pretty great. Boyd is our sole new character here who isn't mounted, but don't let that fool you, he's still pretty amazing. Like a typical fighter, Boyd has massively overkilled HP and strength, but unlike a typical fighter, he also has pretty good skill and speed. This is also the perfect game for a fighter because not only are axes very good, but they make great use of the new weapon weight system. Weight is offset by strength now, which is something that Boyd has in abundance. This means that while Boyd might not have the best base speed early on, he only needs to gain a few points in strength to start doubling most early game enemies, because they tend to be very heavily weighed down by their weapons. And when Boyd starts doubling things, things start dying. Most enemies in the early game will not survive 2 hits from Boyd, which also results in Boyd racking up experience quickly and becoming even stronger. He's easily one of your most powerful characters early in the game, many would argue better than Ike. Later on, well, he's let down a little bit by not being mounted, but ignoring that, Boyd will have massive amounts of strength, and once you have access to silver and killer axes, things just die to him in masses. He also gains bows on promotion in case you want to massively overkill Pegasus Knights and Wyvern Riders. One downside of Boyd that will start to show later in the game though, is he's a bit of a glass cannon. His defense is not very good and his resistance is even worse. His massive HP does mitigate that somewhat, but even then he'll be taking a lot of damage from enemies, and will likely need frequent healing. Still, I can't understate just how much he tears through everything. Boyd starts with a Tempest skill, which doubles the effects of Biorhythm, meaning it goes from a range of plus or minus 5 hit and evasion to plus or minus 10. Biorhythm is a very unreliable mechanic anyway, but plus 10 hit and evasion actually is kind of significant, though it does come at the risk of minus 10 hit and evasion. I'd personally ditch this skill as soon as possible, even though it can be situationally useful. Speaking of situationally useful, Boyd also has a pretty great 10% bond support with Oscar, one that's likely to see use considering how good both of them are, and nothing really wants to take a critical hit from Boyd. Overall, Boyd is great. In my opinion, Path of Radiance's starting party is one of the best in the entire series. You might also notice these bands. These items are exclusive to a second playthrough or more. Some characters start with them, and some enemies will drop them. When this item is equipped, it slightly changes your growth rates. The Fighter Band, I believe, raises the HP and strength growths by 5%, while the Paladin Band raises the HP and speed growths, I believe. Also, you might notice Equip. You actually have to equip these items just like you would weapons. So you can only have one accessory equipped at a time. For now it doesn't matter since we only have one accessory on these characters anyway. Something else that I should probably talk about, notice how there's nothing for Boyd, nothing for Titania, nothing for Ike, but a big red down arrow on Oscar? Here is one of the, in my opinion, worst mechanics of the Tellius games, Biorhythm. This is a sine wave, well, it's not always a sine wave, but it's a wave that fluctuates across the turns. When it's on the low position, the character suffers, I believe it's in this game, -5 to hit and evasion, and at its top position, it's +5 to hit and evasion. In Path of Radiance, it's not that bad, because it's not that big of a change. And Biorhythm doesn't fluctuate that often in Path of Radiance. In Radiant Dawn, however, Biorhythm fluctuates much more radically, and it gives an even bigger bonus. Also of note is that Boyd has the Tempest skill, which doubles the effects of Biorhythm. He gets ±10 to hit and evasion when Biorhythm is high or low, so bear that in mind. We also have some villages that we can visit here. They'll give us some additional items, but before that, I'm going to have Ike fight this axe user here. Actually, sorry to go through all this, but it is the early game, there's a lot that I need to explain. If you press A on top of an enemy, we can lock in their attack range. This is a very useful feature, and if you've played later Fire Emblem games, you'll be well familiar with it. However, you might not know that Path of Radiance was the game that introduced this. Unfortunately though, Path of Radiance does not let you lock in the range of all enemies. That was only added in Shadow Dragon. Didn't mention it last time, but I love this song. It's just called Clash, but it's pretty great. So Ike is doubling this guy. You need 4 or more speed above the enemy in order to double them. And in this game, speed is actually determined by your strength compared to your weapon's weight. So as you can see here, this Iron Axe has a weight of 10. This fighter only has a strength of 5. So he loses 5 speed to his base, which means that his speed is actually beyond 0, which is pretty terrible. Most enemies in the early game are very easy to double because of this, but also watch out. Thanks to this axe having 10 weight, Boyd's speed is actually 3 points lower than it should be, so he's going to have a little bit of a harder time doubling. Even then, he's still 2 shots this guy. Actually, before I do that, I'm going to have Oscar visit this village. Okay, yeah, Oscar's finer weapons. Let's have Oscar visit this village. As is standard with Fire Emblem games, you visit villages and you get an item as a reward. So we get a steel sword. Obviously only one person here can use it, but I'm going to be positioning Oscar in a very specific way to show off something. I've probably already talked about this in the bios, but certain characters have what's called a bond support, which increases their critical by a certain percentage if they're standing adjacent to the character they have a bond with. In this case, Oscar and Boyd are brothers, so Boyd gets a 10% boost to his crit rate if he's standing next to Oscar. Bear that in mind. No support rank is necessary for this, it's just a built-in bonus. Okay, now Titania is going to fight. I'm going to go ahead and kill off this bandit here because enemies of the bandit class, bandit, that's kind of redundant, can destroy villages. You might notice this bandit here is already in range of 1. There's nothing you can do about this. This village is doomed and there's no way you can save it. Now, I'm going to have Titania go and attack this guy. Now, you might be wondering, oh no, you're having Titania attack someone, isn't that a bad thing? Not really. Due to a certain mechanic in this game, it's actually to your benefit to use Titania a lot early on. Also, I'm actually going to be using Titania a lot for this game, I'll just say. She gets very little experience now, but that will change later, and she does become very, very strong later in the game. So it's not much of a detriment to get her level ups. Also, like I said, thanks to this other mechanic, using her a lot early on is actually a benefit to the rest of your party, not a detriment, in terms of experience. And so we have this generic boss talking. So this battle will be to the death, unfortunately for Ike. Actually, it would be pretty terrifying to have your first experience in a life or death battle. But this ugly guy is going to teach us that bandits can destroy villages by smashing the entire house with a single chop. Okay, is Boyd going to crit now? That'd be pretty cool if he did. We've got a few vulneraries, so I'm not too worried about taking some damage early on. So that guy goes down. Gives a little bit of experience. Obviously a lot more than Titania got for a kill. I do want to be careful of Ike here, because even though he dodges a lot here, he's not all that durable yet. Should probably give him the steel sword as well. Speaking of swords, I bet a lot of you are wondering why Ike didn't start out with 4 iron swords. This is actually a glitch that occurs if you skip the visit tutorial, but even if I was playing on a mode that had tutorials, it wouldn't matter. This glitch only exists in the American version. I'm playing the PAL version, so no 4 swords for me. I guess that makes up for Ike not gaining strength in his last level up, although that's still a pretty pathetic showing. Really what I should be doing is I should be giving one of the bands to Ike. I kind of like doing that early on, but also I like giving Oscar's Paladin band to Titania. But I might do that later, because Oscar's more likely to level up at this point, so he's going to benefit more from holding onto the band for now. Okay, gotta get to that house quickly. Well, we haven't actually seen Oscar fight yet, and he's pretty much unbloodied at this point, so I'm going to have him finish this guy. Ike already got a level up. And down goes this guy. There's still a bit of an opportunity for Lancers to get weapon triangle advantage here. Not that much, though. So Oscar's a little less useful here than he would otherwise be. Okay, I don't want to go too far because I don't want to get bashed by a lot of these. So this guy has a... Yeah, bandits only have a movement of 5 in this game, whereas most foot classes have a movement of 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's my Radiant Dawn hard mode days talking there. He's going to have Oscar hang back a little bit. He's probably at no risk of dying, I just want to be safe. Now, Titania has to hit that village now, otherwise the bandit is going to... Well, actually, wait, the bandit's not going to be able to hit it, but I still want to get the village now, just to be safe. Don't worry, we're already pretty much halfway there to saving the village. We get a Seraph Robe. This is a stat boosting item that raises HP by, I believe it's 7 points in this game. Okay, Ike's already taken a little bit of a beating, so I might have to use a vulnerary on him. I held off on using a vulnerary in the one use of the vulnerary in the prologue to save it for now. Okay, Ike can actually trade for this steel sword. And starting at a D rank, he can already use that, so that already puts him above some other Fire Emblem Lords. Boyd is also going to need to vulnerary up pretty soon. I'm not really that opposed to Boyd getting attacked by that guy. Boyd needs a little bit of experience too. Yeah, you just tell yourself that. Okay, he did attack Ike. I don't think he's gonna die in 1 round. Ike is still doubling though, which is pretty nice. Though, who doesn't double these? Well, actually, Boyd doesn't. Sorry, Boyd. When Boyd does start doubling, though, it's completely ridiculous the amount of damage he puts out. And yeah, most things here just instantly die to Titania, and Titania is at very little risk of dying to them. Of course, on the other hand, it means that her counter skill doesn't do much, because she doesn't take much damage. I'm going to have Boyd finish this guy off. And in fact, I'll attack from here, even though the crit chance is unnecessary. I just want to show off the bond support. I didn't get the crit anyway. Trust me, you'll know that if he crits at the start of the animation. Speaking of which, a lot of people criticize the animations in Path of Radiance. I think they're fine, personally. But then again, I'm not really that big of a graphics person. Okay. Okay, so notice how Ike is doubling with the iron sword here, but he's not with the steel sword. And that's because the steel sword has a lot more weight. But, like I said earlier, weight, like how much you're weighed down by your weapons, rather, is governed by your strength stats. So, as Ike's strength increases, he'll be able to use that sword without penalty. And when he does, then things are going to be awesome. Well, I guess that's the bond support working. Nice one, Oscar. I was going to have Ike fight that guy, though. For now, though, I guess I'll just put Oscar over there. And, yeah, I'm just going to probably have Ike fight this guy. The boss, obviously, doesn't have any form of ranged attack. Okay, now, I believe in order to gain the maximum benefit from this chapter, you actually have to beat it in 4 turns or less. I'm probably not going to make much of these turn limits early in the game, because I like to play the early game pretty cautiously myself. But later in the game, I'll probably be making the turn limits without really trying, because that's just how easy this game gets later on. Oh, speaking of which, I need to turn on something in the options. This is something that you only have the option to turn on in the options on a second playthrough or above. Okay, let's see, Boyd's only level 2. Even though, yeah, that's not going to go well for Boyd, but if he does hit it to kill, and this game does use true hit. So yeah, the game does lie to you with hit rates. It's skewed towards higher hits hitting and lower hits missing. The game actually rolls 2 random numbers and takes the average when determining hit rate. Oh, an extra iron sword. You really wouldn't need that in the American version thanks to the Ike 4 sword switch. As you can see here, Ike does more damage with this iron sword against the boss because he doubles. Firstly though, I'm going to make use of Oscar's hit and run ability to get a little bit of extra damage in on the boss before Ike starts to fight him. Ike does need to be the one to seize, so this is going to take an extra turn, but I just want to show, I don't know, I want to show both of this boss's quotes. Yes, I said both of them. Okay, so Oscar moves now, and Ike is going to... Actually, he doesn't even need to use a vulnerary here. Because, yeah, 2 rounds of combat, and this guy won't kill him. So something that I really, really love about Path of Radiance is that Ike has special boss quotes with nearly every generic boss in the game. It's really awesome. Also, Ike has some of the best lines in the game in his boss quotes. In fact, some of the best lines in the series. This, obviously, isn't one of his best, but some of Ike's boss quotes are just insane. Something that Super Smash Bros. Didn't really show that well is that Ike is actually really snarky. You'll be seeing that much later on. Yeah, I know it would have been more efficient to just kill the boss with Titania and have Ike seize, but I want Ike to get the boss kill here. Yeah, even with that extra healing, this boss is going to die. And goodbye, Boss Bandit. Unfortunately, you're an early game Fire Emblem Bandit, and thus you are not meant for better things. Oh, I thought it wouldn't be a level up, but that's fine. And we get an Iron Axe. You know, before we end this, I'm gonna go and... Yeah, how about you 2 trade items? Oh, also, Victory is Near, this song. It's an amazing song, but for some reason it only plays in the very early chapters. It's probably a bug. So yeah, enjoy this song while you still can. It doesn't actually, it's not in very many chapters at all. Anyway, nothing else to do really but seize. I did get all the villagers, right? Yes, I did. And so, that's Ike's first job as a mercenary. That wasn't so bad. Well, of what we saw of him in the prologue, you're already better than him, but obviously he was holding back a lot. So, hints that Ike's father is actually a little bit special. Well, at least that's better than not bringing an axe to your first battle at all. Fake. I think Ike fits in pretty well here. So, this is the bonus experience display. You only get to toggle this on a second playthrough or above. Bonus experience is a mechanic that will make sense a lot later on. For now, though, you'll be seeing how much bonus experience I get from every chapter. This is not the perfect amount, that's 200. So, every chapter most chapters have a turns to clear criteria. And there's a turn limit, and if you go over the turn limit, the turns to clear experience is lowered by 5% for every turn you go over. This one, it's 4 turns that you can't exceed, so I went over by 1, so I get 190 instead of 200, but really, it's no big deal in the grand scheme of things. Like I said, I'm not going to be going for perfect turn bonus experience early on, but later on, I'll probably get it without even trying. Something else to note is, there will often be optional objectives that give you extra bonus experience in chapters. I will be going for those, most of the time at least. So, yeah, that's the end of that chapter, and I'll see you next time for, well, I'll just say it, more bandits! Yay!